Hi, everyone. How was lunch? Good. Excellent. Well, hopefully, I've got about 24, 25 slides here. I admit, it's a bit dense, so hopefully between food coma and the presentation slides, you make it through the presentation, but actually I think you will, because this is definitely a really useful one. It's one that I've gotten great feedback on time and time again. It's been super helpful for these emerging brands to understand how retail buyers think, how they make decisions, and then we, of course, overlay that with some practical tips for you guys so that you are able to sell effectively and stand apart from your peers. But before I begin, just a show of hands, how many here are companies or sales reps who currently sell to big box retailers? Okay. How many of you endeavor to sell to big box retailers? Okay. How about the rest of you guys? You guys just here for the lunch? Yeah. Excellent. Well, a lot of tips that I go through today is very much focused on working with national retailers, but also these tips are adaptable for any type of retailers, small independent retailers all the way to department stores and prestige channels. How up and down the spectrum, all retail buyers ultimately make decisions the same way. Some retailers might emphasize one criteria more than another, but for the most part, it's pretty much shockingly the same. So I will first mention that I highly recommend downloading a copy of these slides. It will save your hands a lot of effort in having to type or write. If you text the word deck to 33733, you'll get a little text back saying, give us your email address, and then you do that, and then the presentation slides go to you immediately. So I'll let you guys do that right now if you have your phones in front of you. Full disclosure, this does sign you up for my email list. So I do send weekly tips, but if you do not want them, just quickly opt out. But at the very minimum, download these slides, because that will just be helpful. So here's kind of the mindset of a retail buyer. You're constantly inundated with new vendors and email pitches. So by my very exhaustive research of myself, I remember one week, thinking like, how many new pitches do I get a week? Like, my email inbox is constantly exploding. Like, I'm just curious, how many do I actually get through email each week? And I sat and counted that at least 55 emails came through to me from brand new people. These are people I'd never heard from in a given week. So if you think about 55 pitches in a given week on top of all the other emails you get from your current vendors, from your internal partners, that's a lot. So not only was I inundated as a target buyer with tons of email pitches, I saw the same thing over and over again. Truthfully, about 10% of what I actually got from people had the information I needed to make a decision. You heard me earlier talk about how people lead with product, right? They talk about how great their product is. Vanessa, you need our product. Target needs our product. But that's not how I make decisions. I make decisions based on what matters to me, and that is, how are you going to drive my sales, and how are you going to do that in an incremental sort of way, right? Don't cannibalize the sales of my products currently on shelf, but how are you going to add to those sales? And then not only that, how are you going to add profitable sales, right? I don't want a low margin item. I have some goals to hit. We need to be profitable. We have to report our earnings to Wall Street, So how are you going to help me with those profitable sales? So today we're going to talk about, obviously this point of view of the retail buyer, but then how to flip that and actually use it as part of your sales pitch. Right? So what is the decision framework for retail buyers, and how do I force fit myself into that framework so that the buyer says yes? In addition, how are we going to go above and beyond this, framework, if you will, and really hone in on what the buyer cares about? And then we'll go through a checklist of every item that should be in your pitch, right? Everything from what your email pitch should contain to what you should say when you're meeting with a buyer in person. But it's a checklist that will be a nice guide. It'll help you figure out what goes into that 10-slide PowerPoint presentation deck. Okay, so really quickly, I know you guys have heard who I am already, but just to give you an overview of why I'm credible to be standing in front of you today, I have a background in market research, but also I have a background in CPG marketing with companies like Johnson & Johnson, as well as having been a retail buyer. So that was my former life, my corporate life. About 5 years ago, I decided to leave my job at Target for family reasons. I left Minneapolis, which is where Target is located, and came home to Los Angeles, which is now where I live and where I'm originally from. And I actually had no desire to start my own company. I actually took a director level position with a luxury retailer. But on the side, I was starting to help companies pro bono with their sales pitches, with their retail pitches. And then I would help them on the side with negotiations and just really was just trying to help these emerging brands. And lo and behold, the stuff that I was doing was starting to work. And I was hearing more and more from these pro bono clients, Vanessa, you really should do this as a living. No one else is providing this information. What you actually are teaching us works. So that is kind of what brings me to what I do today with Retail Path. Retail Path is an agency. So there's actually 2 of us, and we help emerging brands get ready to scale up for big box retail. In short, we help with the sell-in process, right? So we're creating sales communication tools, teaching you guys how to pitch your brands, and then giving you the actual materials to do it. And we're also supporting you once you get into retailers. We're supporting you kind of like an outsourced director of sales. So you'll still need folks like sales rep agencies and brokers to help you with individual retail accounts. But someone like Retail Path might help you kind of be that extra manpower if you need some extra manpower in your sales team. So let's jump straight into the decision framework of retail buyers. So you've heard me say over and over again, it's not just about product. Having a good product is unfortunately nothing special to retail buyers. They see tons of great products. They see a lot of crappy products too, so don't get me wrong. There's not that abundant of good choices out there, but you really need to stand out with more than just having a good product. And you do that through, let's take a step back. Let's talk about what a good product is. You heard us mention on the panel before that a good product is a product that meets a consumer need, right? It's differentiated. It has a unique selling proposition. It's doing something different than what's currently available on shelf. And there's a reason for that, right? Because something that is different from what currently exists on shelf is incremental sales, right? Having something that's exactly the same as something else on shelf already just cannibalizes sales on shelf. So this idea of incremental sales is important. Like, learn that word, use it, adopt it. Every pitch you have with a retail buyer, throw in incremental sales, and not just throw it in blindly, but also back it up, justify and build the rationale for how you build incremental sales for a retail buyer. A good product is also one that is packaged effectively. And so what I mean by that is it's packaged to sell. It speaks for itself on shelf. It is a sea of product out there. I mean, we're all consumers. We all shop in grocery stores. So we know how cluttered and noisy that environment is. And for your product or your brand to succeed at shelf, it needs to be disruptive. It needs to jump out from that sea of product. So your packaging has to be disruptive, right? Not just your product, but your packaging. The colors can't be recessive. It has to stand apart from your adjacent brands. Your packaging also has to clearly communicate what it is that your product does. How is it going to benefit that consumer? And it needs to say this in 3 seconds or less. Because the goal here is to stop the customer or shopper in their track as they're walking down an aisle, grab their attention, and then get them to pick your product up off of a shelf. Because once that product is in that consumer's hand, that's more than half the battle. After that, getting it into the shopping cart is a lot easier. But just breaking through that clutter on shelf is tough. So it's really important to have effective packaging and packaging that communicates your product benefits and your brand and the reason to believe really well. And then it also needs to be, your product needs to be priced correctly, right? So it's not priced too low, it's not priced too high, it's priced in a way that obviously makes money for you and for the retailer, but also makes sense to the consumer. Right? Just don't think about slapping on a margin on top of your cost of goods. Think about the competitive landscape, what the different products are currently on shelf that you compete with, and and the bells and whistles they have versus the bells and whistles you have. If you have more bells and whistles, yes, your product should command a premium to the other item. But if it doesn't, it just kind of needs to make sense from that standpoint. So it's very commonsensical. But you can spend 10 minutes talking about how great your product is on all these dimensions, or you can kind of take the shortcut, which I prefer and have found to be more effective, and that shortcut is talking about the sales, right? So earlier you heard me say, it doesn't matter what you say about your product, how good it is, or it doesn't matter what the buyer thinks, whether or not your product is good. It's about what the consumer thinks. And the consumer votes with their wallet. And to be able to show sales history of your product or the sales potential of your product is going to eliminate that question in the buyer's mind of, is your product good or not, right? The numbers speak for themselves. So whenever you're speaking to a retail buyer, and truthfully, this model also works for speaking to investors or just anyone that you are trying to get on your side, you really want to talk about your product in the framework of this pitch to win model that I've called. It's the sales, the marketing, and the execution. So again, these are concepts that I've already kind of introed to you guys earlier today, but if there's one thing I want you guys to walk away from today after this presentation, it's an understanding of how to use sales, marketing, and vendor execution to your benefit. Like, always frame everything in this context. And the reason why this is so important, because it ultimately answers the larger question, which is, how does this benefit my store? How does this benefit the retailer store? All right, so answering that overall question is easiestly done, that's not a word, best done when you break it up into sales, marketing, and vendor execution. So how do we talk about sales? So let's dive into this further. Actually, let me first start by saying that retail buyers are inherently risk averse. They are always fearful that the product they bring in is not going to sell. So at the end of the day, what you're building, the rationale that you're building through this pitch to win model is basically the argument of we are not risky, right? By covering off on sales, marketing, and execution, you're basically showing, like, this is our business case for why we're not risky. Understanding that mindset, sales is always the easiest way of showing that you're not risky, right? Sales history is a good indicator of potential sales in the future. So if you have sales from another retailer, use it, right? That should be like the first thing out of your mouth when you're talking to a retailer. And it's even better if that sales history comes from a retailer that is very similar to the retailer you're pitching to. So for example, if you're pitching to Walmart, you probably want to talk about how your sales history is at Target. If you're pitching to a regional grocer like Earth Fare, maybe you want to talk about how your sales are in another regional natural grocery store, right? So you kind of want to present your sales that way. Now, it's not just important just to show your sales in a given point in time, but it's important to show your sales over a period of time as well. So let me reference the slides first, for example. Units per store per week is a very common way of looking at sales for retailers. It's like the lowest common denominator for sales, where you can really compare across stores. It's very apples to apples. So let's say you're selling this bottle of water, and it sells 10 units per store per week on average. Well, that's great to know that in a given point in time, it sells on average about 10 units per store per week. But that doesn't give the buyer any sort of reference for, is it growing, is it stagnant, is it declining? Because what they want is to catch that product on an uptrend, right? They want to bring a product in, selling at 10 units per store per week in hopes that it actually sells 15 or 20 down the road. So, don't just lead with what is your sales number from a given point in time, but what is, how does that compare to the average year to date, or how does it compare to your average last year at the same time period, or how does that compare to the year to date average? So there are different ways in which to show trends, but the idea here is to show growth if you can. For those of you who are brand new and may not have sales history, there are other things that you can do. You can set up your own online store and show sales from that. But actually what I prefer to do, and it takes a little bit of money to do it, but what I typically do with my clients is go and buy point of sales data. So that is data like IRI data or Nielsen, syndicated data. So it's basically data you can purchase where you can look at maybe a comparable item or look at a comparable brand, look at their sales, calculate the units per store per week of that brand, and then guesstimate how you would do based on that anchor point, right? So if you think that, if I'm Dasani and I think that we can probably do, what's another national water brand? I'm from LA, so Arrowhead pops to my head. Aquafina, thank you. So if I'm like, okay, well, I think Dasani could do about, half of what Aquafina does, that's, you just take a wild guess. The important thing is to state your assumption. If you're forecasting sales, state your assumptions clearly so that whoever's looking at those sales numbers understands how you calculate it and can retrofit it for their own needs. But I cannot emphasize the importance of forecasting data if you don't have sales data. We did this with one of the brands that we presented to Walmart with one of my client brands. And this is the brand that got a commitment in 20 minutes. It's because of a lot of things, but one of the things we did was we took IRI syndicated sales data, created sales forecasts, and said, this is what we think this can do in your stores. And it doesn't matter if we're wrong. I mean, hopefully we're right, and it's better if we're right. But the idea is that the idea is demonstrating the discipline and the thinking and just giving them a number that feels realistic so that they have a sense of how this might do in their stores. A real quick note about sales. For new brands, sometimes there's confusion as to what exactly a sales number is. So in my world, and kind of what I'm referencing here is point of sales data. So this is not shipment sales. This is not what leaves your door and goes to the retailer, wholesale dollars wise. This is consumption data, right? This is what's actually being rung up at the register's retailer. And the reason why that data is important to show retailers is because that is a direct reflection of consumer demand. Right? Sometimes some brands think that they can show their shipment sales and then that be enough. Sometimes brands think it's okay just to say we shipped an order and they had to reorder really quickly and we sold out. Those measures are not as concrete as consumption sales, right? You want to prove to retailers that your product has demand from the consumer. In addition to showing sales, you also want to overlay what retailers that came from. Like I mentioned before, it's helpful context. If I'm a Target buyer, I'm interested in knowing what the Walmart sales numbers are. But also, it kind of does another thing. It kind of kills a few birds with one stone. Showing who your current distribution is kind of creates a herd mentality, right? Retailers have this fear of losing out, and so if they know their competitor is interested in your product, or better yet, they know that they learn that their competitor has your product, that's going to spark a little bit more urgency. It's kind of sad that has to happen, but it works, and it does, and it's true. So, saying who your current distribution is, your store list is, helpful because it not only shows that your sales numbers come from a place that is very similar to the store that you're pitching to, but it also shows that you are in demand by other retailers. It creates that herd mentality. And also it actually says it's a statement of your scalability, of your operations. If I, as a Target buyer, know that you have sold your products to another national retailer, that gives me reassurance that you'll be able to ship to my chain of national stores. So having that is a nice, it does multiple things. So back to that pitch to win model, right? There's three things: sales, marketing, and execution. Number two, marketing programs. We spoke ad nauseum this morning about marketing programs, so I won't belabor the point, but the main takeaway here is that you need several kinds of marketing to make your products sell, right? You need what I call out-of-store marketing and in-store marketing. And what out-of-store marketing does is it builds the brand awareness, it creates consumer demand, it educates consumers on why your product, why your brand, and not someone else. And then through that, you're able to funnel traffic into specific stores, right? So if you have maybe out-of-store marketing like FSIs, those are those coupons that are in your Sunday paper, Sunday circular, if anyone still gets Sunday papers, that's what an FSI is. And sometimes you'll see them, it'll be like a coupon, right? $2 off, and sometimes you'll see like a little retailer logo attached to it, and you'll know that you can redeem that coupon in that store. Well, that out-of-store marketing is a trigger point for driving sales traffic in that specific retailer. So that out-of-store marketing lever is really important. And then the second piece that's really important is in-store marketing, right? So that's signing up for retailer marketing, and grocers are notorious for this. Like before you can even talk to some grocery stores, they make you pony up, like how much you can pay for slotting fees, what marketing programs you're going to sign up for.
I think you may have said 8 or 10 times, incremental sales are important. Really? I mean, that was important, right? To get that one in there. But I love how she was kind of closing, and it's something I noticed is that it appears that if we did more of our work, being category experts or really knowing what's going on, and kind of did the work for the buyer, we'd have a better chance of engaging the buyer. Is that fair?
Absolutely. So decision fatigue is a real thing. You're making decisions constantly throughout the day. So the last thing you need to do is have vendors give you information and then sit there with a in a quandary trying to figure out why it matters to you. So spoon feed it. It'll make it easier for them to decide.
Spoon feeding is important, and I love it. Another one here that you laid out here, and I'm going to use this. I'm going to paraphrase this. It sounds like the best thing that could happen for anyone here is to get into a big box retailer, but also the worst thing that could happen is to get in a big box retailer, right? Because sales go up, but the financial implications are really scary. And you started out by really encouraging folks to make sure that your house is in order, right? Yeah. Financially, and you've got things ready to go. So talk a little bit more about that, kind of that final thought for these guys about having their house in order before they really jump in and start approaching, because as a buyer, you might actually say yes.
Yeah. At the end of the day, everyone is in this to make money, yourselves included. So knowing that, you have to protect your margins ever so carefully, and there's nothing like a big box retailer to quickly erode those margins if you're not set up and prepared to deal with the requirements of a big box retailer. So, just go in with eyes wide open. There are so many people in this room even who knows the financial expectations and costs that big retailers require. So make friends with those people who know these things in this room, because when you get that call from Walmart or you get that call from Target, you're going to want to call these people that you met today and be like, all right, what am I really in for? And then you can look honestly at your business and say, yes, I'm ready, Walmart. Sure, I'll do it, or no.
All right, great. Hey, thank you very much. Again, thanks again. Thanks for Vanessa.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.